What happens when a 6,000-year-old god obsessed with paperwork, rock formations, and absolutely allergic to carrying money decides to fake his own death? You get Zhongli, Liyue's former Geo Archon, current funeral consultant, and walking financial disaster. Imagine a deity whose definition of fun includes meticulous stone carving, dramatic monologues about currency, and ghosting an entire nation just to test if they are ready to adult without divine babysitting. Zhongli's story starts with Morax, his original godly form, casually terraforming mountains and co-running the Guili assembly alongside Guizhong, an inventive goddess who loved mechanics as much as Morax loved geology. They basically built a thriving civilization through sheer determination and a mild god complex until the Archon War rudely interrupted, like a violent HOA dispute but with divine superpowers. Unfortunately, tragedy struck when Guizhong was mortally wounded, delivering one final insightful comment before dramatically dying among glazed lilies. Talk about making an exit. Morax, in a fit of grief, promptly decided the best coping mechanism was constructing another civilization, this time near the ocean. Hello, Liyue Harbor. Here he introduced humanity to the joys of contracts and capitalism, because nothing eases grief like binding legal documents and a new economy based entirely on a shiny rock named after yourself. Modesty clearly wasn't in his skill set. To keep himself entertained during the early days, Zhongli enjoyed creating elaborate rituals and bureaucratic practices, ensuring everything from trade agreements to fish markets disputes required at least 3 signatures and 1 ceremonial dance. He also became notoriously bad at carrying money, partly because he invented currency itself, and partly because he found it amusing to watch mortals panic when the bill arrived. "I forgot my wallet" quickly became his signature phrase, much to the horror and financial ruin of everyone who invited him out for tea. Throughout his early reign, Zhongli befriended adepti, mystical creatures who, despite their immense power, found his obsessive detailing mildly annoying yet strangely endearing. They learned to tolerate his convoluted rituals, nodding politely while secretly plotting their escapes from endless meetings about mineral taxonomy. Occasionally, these adepti attempted to subtly remind him about the impracticality of his financial policies, but Zhongli was eternally deaf to the words fiscal responsibility. Fast forward several millennia, and Morax, now known as Rex Lapis, spent his time balancing being both a ruthless god of war and a meticulous divine accountant. He single-handedly created mora, proving once and for all that money really does grow on trees. Or at least it falls out of divine chess pieces called gnosis. Under his watchful and slightly obsessive-compulsive gaze, Liyue blossomed into a powerful economic hub. Yet life in Liyue was peaceful and prosperous, but obsessively organized, until he began wondering if humans could handle independence without his constant micromanagement. Spoiler alert, they were going to find out in the most chaotic way possible. Thus came the Rite of Dissension, a festival where Rex Lapis annually dropped by for prophetic appearances. Except this year he decided to spice things up by literally dropping dead mid-performance, staging the most theatrical fake death in celestial history. Shakespeare could never. Panic ensued as the city collectively screamed, "Did our god just ghost us mid-blessing?" To fill the long, mundane years, Zhongli had amused himself by creating increasingly elaborate and unnecessary bureaucratic processes. Mortals complained, adepti sighed, and yet Zhongli found joy in the complex tapestry of frustration and inefficiency he wove, like watching an endless sitcom where the punchline was always paperwork. He also took immense pleasure in adopting the role of a wise mentor, offering cryptic advice that only made sense decades later, usually accompanied by a smug "I told you so." While waiting for his grand moment, Zhongli occupied his time perfecting the art of procrastination, meticulously rearranging the tea leaves in his cup, and pondering the existential dread of retirement. He took peculiar joy in watching mortals scramble through last-minute arrangements and ceremonial meltdowns, mentally noting which of his carefully constructed bureaucratic hurdles caused the most entertaining chaos. Enter Child, a Fatui harbinger and perpetual troublemaker with more charisma than common sense. Determined to uncover Rex Lapis' secrets, Child befriended Zhongli, who was now masquerading as an overly sophisticated mortal incapable of remembering his wallet. Together they toured the city like the weirdest buddy cop duo ever. Child-footing bills, Zhongli pontificating about ancient tea-making techniques, unaware he was literally dining with a god. Child dramatically escalated the situation, stole Rex Lapis's lifeless dragon-shaped exuvia, and awakened an ancient sea monster, Osail, to lure out the supposedly deceased Archon. Zhongli, true to his retirement plan, just watched the ensuing chaos unfold, probably sipping tea and muttering, "Not my circus, not my monkeys." Luckily, Liyue citizens and adepti rose spectacularly to the occasion, defeating Osail by dropping Ningguang's beloved floating jade chamber on his head. A subtle reminder never to underestimate rich businesswomen. Amid the battle, Zhongli added humorous commentary from the sidelines, noting that he hadn't seen this much excitement since he implemented triple signature paperwork for minor fishing disputes. As the chaos unfolded, Zhongli secretly relished every frantic moment, treating the scene like a stage play he had orchestrated, occasionally clapping quietly when a mortal came up with a particularly inventive solution. He even began narrating the unfolding drama to himself, critiquing everyone's strategy as though he were a divine sports commentator. "A bold move from Ningguang," he'd murmur approvingly, though I still question her decision not to fill out the emergency Jade Chamber destruction form in triplicate. When the dust settled, Zhongli casually revealed he'd orchestrated everything as an elaborate test, like a cosmic episode of Punk'd. He even surrendered his divine gnosis to the Fatui in exchange for his ultimate freedom, marking it as his contract to end all contracts, leaving everyone to collectively groan at his obsession with fine print. The Fatui, slightly confused but always opportunistic, happily accepted the gnosis without much fuss. The adepti and citizens, after initial shock and mild outrage, eventually shrugged it off, accepting the very Zhongli-esque move as just another quirk of their eccentric ex-god. Zhongli further amused himself by pretending to be confused about the entire situation, feigning surprise at people's astonishment, and generally enjoying the role of an elderly god experiencing selective memory loss. In the aftermath, Zhongli observed carefully as the citizens adapted, discreetly taking notes on who panicked most entertainingly and who displayed admirable calm under pressure. He found amusement in trivial things, like the bureaucratic nightmare created when citizens tried to file an official complaint about an Archon faking his death, only to discover Zhongli himself had drafted the original complaint form centuries ago, complete with multiple contradictory clauses. Now officially retired, Zhongli settled comfortably into mortal life, working at the Wangsheng funeral parlor, because nothing screams retirement like planning funerals for a living. He spends his days lecturing anyone unfortunate enough to mention rocks, contracts, or history, and strategically forgetting his wallet whenever bills appear. Hu Tao, his boss, tolerates his financial negligence because he's undeniably good for business. Nobody can sell a casket quite like an ex-Archon. In his spare time, Zhongli also developed new hobbies, such as attending funerals he wasn't invited to purely to rate their ceremonial accuracy, or critiquing local restaurants on their geological authenticity. This dish lacks the gritty authenticity of actual rocks. Liyue, meanwhile, thrives independently, proving that sometimes the best way to help is simply by stepping back, preferably without faking your death next time. Zhongli's legacy? A nation confident enough to stand alone, countless unpaid restaurant tabs, and the eternal lesson that even gods prefer freeloading their way through immortality. Visitors often find themselves entrapped in endless philosophical conversations with him, only realizing too late they are footing the extravagant bill. To date, no restaurant in Liyue dares refuse service to Zhongli, partially due to his charm, but mostly because he's the city's greatest running joke and tourism draw. In short, Zhongli remains an eternal paradox, a wise yet whimsical deity whose greatest joy lies not in divine power, but in the mortal world's daily absurdities. Just remember, if you ever meet him, you're definitely paying. Feeling inspired by Zhongli's divine shenanigans? Why not subscribe so you don't miss out on our next videos? Unlike him, you don't owe me a single dime. I mean mora. See you in the next one. Bye bye.